Hey guys, tonight we drift back into the past through thick layers of time-swept sand, beyond the glow of modern streetlights, to a land where the sun doesn't just rise, it scorches. Welcome to ancient Egypt, where gods walked like men, and men built mountains of stone just to die inside them. The air is dry, the sky burns a molten red, and somewhere in the village, a priest is scolding a farmer for not offering enough onions to Ra. Meanwhile, you're barefoot, slightly sunburnt, and starting to regret time traveling without sunscreen. Trust me, you're not going to survive this. But hey, that's what makes tonight's story so much fun. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And please, drop a comment and tell me, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it there? I love reading those before I sleep. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're trudging across cracked, sun-baked earth, and the sun, oh, it has no patience. It's barely morning, yet it's already beaming down on you like you've somehow offended the climate in a past life. Ahead of you, a strange scene. Low mud brick houses with thatched reed roofs, a couple of sluggish cows plodding across the road, and a bunch of naked kids chasing a cat like it's the fluffy, meowing version of the pharaoh himself. Welcome to Egypt, around 1300 BCE, the New Kingdom era, the golden age of ancient Egypt, a time when pharaohs didn't just rule, they believed they were living gods. And you? Sadly, you're not one of them. You're just some person who dropped in, illiterate in hieroglyphs, lacking any insurance number, and worst of all, completely clueless about how to block the sun using crocodile dung like the locals do. You try to make your way toward the Nile, the only place that counts as a public bath meets life source meets waste dump. Along its banks, people are beating clothes against rocks to wash them, and if you get close enough, you'll see a little boy scrubbing his face with sand. Yep, sand. The region's premier exfoliant. Beneath your feet, the earth starts to soften. The Nile is rising. Flood season is coming, and this is no small matter. History shows that the river's flood cycles decided the fate of the entire kingdom. If the water rose enough, the crops thrived and the gods were pleased. If it didn't, well, you'd better start praying in hieroglyphs. But here's a strange little detail few people know. The ancient Egyptians believed the Nile's floods were the tears of goddess Isis, shed each year in mourning for her husband Osiris, who was, long story short, chopped into pieces. A tragic, watery tale that happened to be great for agriculture. Don't ask for logic, it's mythology. Historians still debate one intriguing issue. Was the Nile's water measuring system, the Nilometer, a purely administrative tool, or was it also religious? Some say it was for calculating taxes. More water, more crops, more taxes. Others argue it was tied to rituals and divine will. Maybe both. Who knows? The Egyptians didn't leave a user manual. You scoop up some water and splash it on your face. It's not as cool as you'd hoped. Something slimy brushes past, maybe algae, maybe your fading belief in hygiene. A light breeze carries the scent of mud, fish, and something oddly reminiscent of fermented fabric softener. You shiver. Still, at least there are no deadlines here. As you shuffle back toward town, an old man selling onions waves at you. You nod politely. In ancient Egypt, onions and garlic were considered sacred foods, sometimes even used to pay laborers building the pyramids. Imagine waking up every day, working under that merciless sun, and getting paid in onions. Not a great salary, but hey, no income tax. You keep walking. The sun slaps your head like Ra himself is testing your endurance. But you're still alive, still moving. And somewhere inside you, a tiny thought flickers. I need SPF 10,000 or another reincarnation. Now, you're squatting in the corner of a small mud brick home. No dining table, no chairs, just a linen cloth on the floor and a loaf of bread that looks suspiciously like a river rock. You snap off a piece. Crack. The signature crunch of every Egyptian breakfast. The bread is made from barley or emmer wheat, an ancient low-gluten grain that's picky, hard to grow, and excellent at retaining bits of grinding stone. One bite, and you're not just fueling up, you're sharpening your teeth. No dentist needed, just time and a few more breakfasts like this. You think back to the splash of Nile water on your face earlier. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen? Now you're chewing bread with the essence of dust and ground rock, paired with a lovely soup called liquid beer. Yes, Beer is the official breakfast beverage here, thick, warm, and tasting faintly of fermented porridge. Don't judge, it's safer than Nile water. Even kids drink it. Not to look cool, but because parasites are not a vibe. You exhale. A fly lands on your piece of bread, then another. You don't bother shooing them away anymore. They're just trying to survive, same as you. And who knows? Maybe they have their own guardian deity. The Egyptians had gods for everything: sun, river, cats, onions, so a fly god wouldn't be that strange. Here's a little-known fact. The ancient Egyptians used to award medals shaped like flies to their bravest soldiers. It symbolized resilience, persistence, and the tenacity to stick to the target, just like the flies sticking to your bread right now. Unsanitary, perhaps. Symbolic? Absolutely. Historians still debate this. Did Egyptians really have poor nutrition, or are we misinterpreting the role of food in their society? Some believe they lacked protein and survived mostly on vegetables and beer. But archaeology shows human bones often carry traces of fish and meat, especially during festivals. Maybe they ate well, just not very deliciously. You glance outside, the sun is getting fiercer. A mother walks by, baby in one arm, a water jug in the other, still in her linen dress, still barefoot. The scent of sunburn and sweat drifts past, light as a kind of everyday incense. You put the bread down, brush a few grains of sand from your lips. In a while, you'll have to head to the fields or carry bricks, or, if fate is particularly ironic, get recruited into a pyramid construction crew. But for now, you nibble a bit more of your stone bread, sip your beer porridge, and savor this last moment of peace before the sun decides to roast you again. You're bent low, hands gripping a wooden hoe, back soaked, hair matted, legs almost numb. The sun's still overhead, blazing like it's determined to burn away any lingering hope of survival in this barley field. There's no clock, no lunch break, just the sun, your eternal, hot-tempered boss who never clocks out early. You're farming, the most common job in ancient Egypt. Around 90% of the population worked the land, spending most of their time in the fields with mud and with itchy bugs in places you can't politely scratch. This morning you were eating rock bread dipped in beer. Now you're sowing seeds of hope into the soil using a hoe that someone described as 3,000-year-old tech that hasn't seen a single update. The grip of the wooden handle in your palm, your shoulders tensing with each lift, your spine stretching like it's unraveling. This isn't some trendy gym simulation. This is your life now. And if your back hurts, congrats. That's the sign of a hardworking farmer or a time-traveling stranger who just got swept into a civilization that doesn't care much for onboarding. Remember the fly from breakfast? Now its entire family has moved into your sweat. You glance into the distance, a group of men hauling stones along a dirt path. They're not farmers. They're builders, the ones working on grand projects like temples, tombs, and of course, pyramids. A strange but true fact. Contrary to popular belief, pyramid builders weren't slaves. They were skilled laborers, given food, places to sleep, and even foot massages. This detail still makes historians raise a collective eyebrow. Surprised? So are the scholars. There's still debate around whether all workers were compensated or just a small elite class of master craftsmen. Ancient inscriptions mention rations like bread, onions, beer, and dried fish. But were these actual wages or just budget catering with receipts? You bend down again. Your hands are caked with mud. Your feet sink deeper into the soil. No gloves, no boots, just a strip of linen around your waist and a determination not to pass out before noon. A shout rings out. A supervisor, apparently the only person in the area with both a whip and the job description of pointing enthusiast, is signaling at you. You stand upright, trying hard to look like a temporary local. He snorts, then walks away. Maybe you've just been accepted, or maybe he just didn't think you were worth whipping. You breathe a sigh of relief and return to your old wooden hoe. And so it begins again. Hoe, lift your head, breathe, wipe your forehead, continue. Steady, slow, an ancient dance between human and earth. And though you don't want to admit it, part of you is starting to enjoy the rhythm. There's something primal, simple, and deeply human about it. You're trudging along a cracked dirt path, your back sticky with sweat, your sleeve, well, you don't have one, soaked with the scent of yesterday's sun. In the distance, the sun sets behind the dunes like a glowing red egg dropped onto the ground and starting to melt. Home at last. If you can call home a mud brick room with a low ceiling, no windows, shared with a water jar, 2 cats, and several insects science hasn't named yet. You flop down on a straw mat, stiff and itchy, and wonder if you'll have the strength to stand up again. But no. Before you can even doze off, your stomach begins to grumble. And you know what that means. The ancient Egyptian toilet. It's not private. No doors, no locks. Just an outdoor corner with a few strategically placed stones. Wealthier homes might have limestone seats with drainage channels, but not you. You've got the moonlight, the breeze, and the holy presence of a dung beetle passing by. The sad part is you know exactly what caused this. Probably from bathing in that lower part of the Nile earlier, the one downstream from laundry, which itself is downstream from, well, people. The Egyptian idea of hygiene is noble, but in their reality, clean is a relative concept. You recall a curious fact. In ancient Egyptian medicine, diarrhea was sometimes treated by smearing a mix of cow dung on your chest while chanting a spell. You've got to hand it to them. They were creative. As for whether it worked, historians haven't dared test that one. Scholars still argue about this. Did Egyptian healers genuinely believe in their medicine, or were they really just skilled spiritualists? Papyrus scrolls show surprisingly detailed anatomical knowledge, how to set bones, stop bleeding, even drain abscesses. But every treatment came with a spell. Apply the ointment, then recite, "O Thoth, drive the worm from this man's liver." Who knows, maybe it was placebo, or maybe the patient just got scared into recovery. You return home, feeling lighter in body but heavier in spirit. Somewhere nearby, someone lights incense at an altar to Bastet, the cat-headed goddess of home and harmony. The smoke drifts through a wall crevice, carrying a strange scent like sap, dried orange, and cat ash. You clasp your hands and whisper something. Not sure if it's gratitude, a plea, or simply, "Please don't give me diarrhea again." To the Egyptians, the gods weren't just in the sky. They lived in every stone, every drop of water, every hot gust of night wind. Every action might be witnessed. Blaming illness? Maybe it's because you cursed Set for making it too sunny. Darkness settles in. The sky is full of stars, but no one's stopping to admire them. You're too tired for romance. And though a scorpion might crawl under your mat, you fall asleep anyway, because your body has no energy left to be afraid. You wake before the sun has fully risen, not because of an alarm clock, but because a man in a linen wrap is pounding your door with a staff and shouting, "Outsider, rise! The king summons you." You're dazed. Your mind's still caught between a dream of bubble tea and a reality where tea hasn't even been invented. But the phrase, "the king summons," wakes your brain faster than a triple espresso. You stand, trying to straighten the cloth wrapped around your waist. It doesn't help much, but at least you look less like someone who just got chased out of a dream by the crocodile god Sobek. You're led toward the palace, or rather a complex of white limestone buildings with massive pillars, walls etched with carvings, and rows of stone-faced guards so expressionless you wonder if they're even alive. The palace isn't noisy. It's solemn, cool, compared to outside, and smells of tree resin, worn stone, and authority. Then you see him. Pharaoh, wearing a tall crown, a robe embroidered with golden thread, holding a scepter and giving you a look, like you're today's exotic entree on the spiritual menu. He speaks, not loudly, not rushed, but each word lands like a stone dropped down a dry well. He says he's heard about a newcomer in the village, someone strong, unfamiliar, and skilled at fighting Nile rats. Ah, so the tale of you whacking that rodent yesterday traveled far. He needs someone like you. Not for war, but for a new temple construction project dedicated to the god Amun. It's a massive, dusty, long-term mission, he adds with a completely unreadable face, blessed by Ra himself. You nod. Not because you have a choice. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh isn't just king, he's a living god, the earthly form of Horus, the son of the sun god. When pharaoh calls, any no would be blasphemy. Here's a curious fact. Whenever the pharaoh sneezed, his courtiers had to bless him in unison, because it was believed to be a sign that Ra had sent him divine energy. Yes, even a sneeze could become a religious event. Historians still debate, did the people truly believe the pharaoh was divine, or was it just a political strategy wrapped in sacred packaging? Some evidence points to deep devotion, while other texts portray pharaohs as scheming humans worried about rebellion and often struggling with insomnia. You bow and are handed a toolkit. Hammer, chisel, and a measuring string for stones. Sleep fades away. Morning light sneaks through the cracks in ancient stone. You're now standing on a massive worksite where hundreds of people shout, carry blocks, chip away at walls, and occasionally pause to offer incense to an unfinished pile of rock. You think back. Yesterday you were eating sand bread. Today you're a temple worker. All because of one rat and one look from a god king. Welcome to ancient Egyptian politics, where no resume is required, just divine approval. The clang of metal on stone echoes steadily like the heartbeat of an ancient world pulsing under a blazing sun. You grip a wooden hammer, copper head, hands trembling, not from exhaustion, but because you have no idea what you're about to strike. A burly man next to you pats your shoulder. Just chisel along the line. Don't mess it up. If you do, the priest will chant your name with a bit of venom. You gulp. On the limestone block before you are intricate geometric lines, hieroglyphs, sacred symbols, and the Eye of Horus staring like an ancient security camera. This isn't just carving. Every misstroke could be seen as an insult to the gods. You're not just laboring, you're inscribing the face of the cosmos. A historical fact, the Egyptians built temples to honor their major gods, and each temple was considered a living body symbolizing the universe. The columns were the spine, the ceiling, the sky. Every carving was divine speech, and the carver, like you, was the one transmitting the voice. You take a deep breath. First, strike. A puff of dust. Second strike. The stone shifts slightly, no cracks. Your mentor nods. Don't expect this to be easy. You'll chisel from sunrise until your shadow stretches long like a mummy's. Lunch is stale bread, onions, and if you're lucky, a date passed through 3 people's hands. Another strange but true detail. Egyptians inscribed curses against thieves directly onto temple walls. Not smile, you're on camera, but lines like, "This thief shall lose his tongue in the afterlife. His soul shall be devoured by jackals on the 3rd night." Intense, but undeniably effective. Scholars still debate, were these inscriptions actual threats or merely the priesthood's way of flexing spiritual power? Some argue that the common folk were genuinely terrified and wouldn't dare cross the line. Others believe, well, if hunger hit hard enough, maybe they'd risk it anyway. You wipe your forehead. Your hands are blistered, but something in you is shifting. With every strike of the chisel, a part of you blends into the stone, into the flow of time. You, a stranger lost in the ancient world, are leaving a mark, even if it's just a few dents on an unfinished pillar. In the distance, a ceremonial band begins to beat their drums. The sound echoes through the temple courtyard, steady, sacred, like the heartbeat of the gods themselves. You pause, look up at the sky. A bird flies overhead, its shadow cast across the rising wall. You don't know if it's an omen or just a bird looking for shade, but you truly feel that you are part of something larger than yourself. You're lying down, not on a straw mat, not in the shade of a fig tree, but on a cold, flat slab of stone in a room heavy with the scent of resin, natron, salt, and something so sacred you could smell it with your eyes closed. Condolences. You've died. Maybe it was illness, maybe heat stroke, maybe an undercooked Nile fish. But one thing's for sure, your journey is just beginning. In ancient Egypt, death wasn't the end. It was an application for immigration into a whole new universe, one with more checkpoints than a student visa. First comes mummification. A team of soul arrangers, that's the polite term, removes your organs and places them into 4 canopic jars, each with a lid shaped like a god's head. Your heart, most important, is kept for weighing later. Your brain, that gets yanked out with a hook and tossed. Ancient Egypt didn't hold deep thoughts in very high regard. Here's a strange fact. Embalmers wore masks of the god Anubis during the process, not to scare you, but to represent divine presence. And sometimes they'd pretend to talk to the corpse. Like, "You okay? Don't squirm, I'm wrapping your legs now." Scholars still debate. Was mummification purely religious, or was it also a service industry with upgrade packages? There's evidence the rich got scented oils and high-quality linen wrappings. The poor, let's not speak ill of the buried. Once wrapped like a holiday gift nobody wants to open, you're taken to your resting place, a tomb, a pit, or a sandhole, depending on your family's coin or cows. You might even clutch a Book of the Dead, not a horror story, but a soul traveler's manual filled with spells, passwords, and ghost-avoiding tips. Then comes the final trial, the Judgment Hall of Osiris. You enter spirit form, of course, and your heart is placed on a scale. On the other side, the feather of Maat, goddess of truth, justice, and universal order. If your heart is heavier than the feather, implying you lied, cheated, stole goats, etc., a creature named Amit, crocodile head, lion body, hippo legs, devours your soul on the spot. No reincarnation, no second chance. The end. A historical fact. Egyptians weren't afraid of death. They were afraid of not reaching the field of reeds, a peaceful eternity of mild sunshine, cool rivers, and sand-free bread. You remember it all. The chisel in your hand, the gritty bread, the morning with the flies, the cold stare of the pharaoh, and that one Nile rat that changed your fate. You weren't perfect, but you were kind. By ancient Egyptian standards, you never cursed a god, defaced a statue, or stole someone's amulet. The scale tips toward the lighter side. A god nods. The door opens. You step into the light, as gentle as a blink on a summer afternoon, and ahead of you lies a river shimmering in sunlight, a field of blooming lotuses, and a boat already waiting. You're walking leisurely across the field of reeds, the lush paradise imagined by the ancient Egyptians, filled with soft light and absolutely no fly daring enough to buzz past your face. You have an entire afterlife to rest. The question is, where? You look around. Some step onto golden boats, others stroll along silver sands, and some are simply nowhere to be seen. You begin to understand, even in the afterlife, your burial site, the number of grave goods, and the aroma of your incense say a lot about who you used to be. A historical note, Egyptians believed the tomb was a second home, where the soul returned each night after its cosmic journey. So investing in a tomb wasn't just religious, it was afterlife real estate strategy. The rich? They had stone-lined tombs painted with colorful scenes, complete with bedrooms, kitchens, toilets, and statues in their likeness to receive the soul. The ultra-rich? Welcome to the pyramid. 7-star hotel for the spirit. Pillows of gold, perfumes from Syria. Walls carved with their life stories, 12 meters long. By the time you finished reading, the Nile had flooded again. And you? You look past the palm trees to the humbler tombs tucked under sand. No paintings, no statues, just a few clay jars. One with stale bread, another with beer so fermented even the flies turn it down. A strange fact, the poor were often buried directly in hot sand, wrapped in rough linen. But thanks to the dry climate, many accidental mummies were preserved better than those who paid top coin. Scholars still debate, were the pyramids truly built out of faith, or were they political flexes by the pharaohs? Some argue it was a symbolic rule. Even in death, I remain visible. You sigh. In your hand is a small terracotta figurine, a shabti, a servant meant to work in your place in the afterlife. It's crooked, a little lopsided, but it's yours. A modest soul in a sacred yet stratified world. Someone passes by holding a jug of beer, beaming with joy. You ask and learn. His son's a potter, fires up the kiln every month, makes a few extra jars for his father's grave. You smile. Maybe eternity isn't measured in gold, but in who still remembers you. Ah, but that was only the script for if you had died in ancient Egypt. A scented, sacred, and budget-conscious afterlife simulation. Don't worry, you're still alive, still have legs that ache, arms that carry, and a back that carries everything else. Time to return to reality, where you're standing under a sun that feels like someone left the oven door open, gripping a water jug, feet caked in dust, and sweat racing down your spine like it's competing in a downhill sprint. You're heading to the market, not for luxury goods, but to trade some onions for dried fish and, if luck is kind, a few scraps of goat meat that don't look too suspicious. Every step is a patience test, heat, flies, and haggling louder than a flash sale live stream. A historical fact, ancient Egyptian markets didn't use coins like today. Most trade was barter or labor for goods. You'd trade grain for fish, fish for oil, oil for wool, and sometimes wool for half-moldy bread. You pass an old woman selling pottery. She hands you a small, worn-out oil lamp, smiling. To light your way home, or at least to scare the flies. You chuckle. Not because it's funny, but because there's no electricity, and in ancient Egypt, darkness is literal. The kind of dark where you can hear grains of sand falling. In ancient Egypt, the simple act of lighting a lamp was both a necessity and a ritual. Lamps were typically shallow clay bowls filled with castor oil or animal fat, ignited with a linen wick. These fuels emitted a pungent odor, prompting some households to add aromatic resins or herbs to mask the smell. Others preferred to extinguish the lamp quickly and retire early. While temple murals often depict serene scenes of daily life, administrative records tell a different story. Documents from villages like Deir el Medina reveal complaints about droughts, heavy taxation, and theft. This contrast suggests that the idyllic images might have been idealized representations, possibly influenced by religious or political agendas. After a day of labor, acquiring staples like garlic and barley flour was a modest reward. Children played with old ox cart wheels, and laughter echoed as they tossed onion skins at each other. Such moments brought to mind ancestral tales of hardship, now understood firsthand. Returning to a humble mud brick dwelling, you prepared a simple meal, barley porridge with garlic and onions. This divine dinner was a staple for many, nourishing yet unpretentious. As the sun set behind rocky hills and the Nile murmured nearby, you ate slowly, not out of leisure, but because the porridge clung stubbornly to your teeth. Despite the dust, hunger, and smoky air, there was a profound sense of authenticity in this rhythm of life. Sleep came amidst the gentle river breeze, moonlight filtering through a thatched roof, and the steady chirping of crickets. Yet the distant beat of ritual drums signaled a communal concern, the Nile's early rise. Such floods could bring fertility or destruction. Villagers lit lamps, donned headscarves, and whispered prayers. A priest, clad in white linen and bearing a statue of Hapi, the god of the Nile's inundation, led a procession to the riverbank. Offerings of wooden dolls, lotus flowers, beer, and honey were cast into the waters, seeking Hapi's favor. Scholars debate whether such rituals stemmed from deep-seated beliefs or served as societal tools to manage collective anxieties. Regardless, the community's unified actions reflected a shared hope. Holding a palm frond, you murmured a prayer, uncertain of its efficacy, but aware that if the waters rose too high, even your modest bed could be swept away. As the ceremony concluded, the statue was lowered, lotus petals drifted downstream, and flickering lamps mirrored unspoken wishes. Walking home past newly sown fields and earthen dikes, the scent of fresh silt filled the air, a reminder of life's fragility and resilience. Tomorrow, the village would inspect levees, reinforce canals, and with hope, commence a new planting season. You return home, tired but not hopeless. In ancient Egypt, life was a cycle of rituals, labor and waiting for the flood season, for the crops to ripen, for the gods to soften their hearts. And even though you may not always understand the stars or the statues, you're still deeply connected to this rhythm, through your back, your hands, and a kind of old, persistent faith. The sky hasn't yet brightened when you hear a knock at the door. Not a real knock, more like the sound of a staff hitting the ground, steady and rhythmic like a countdown to fate. Outside stands a man in a short cloak, holding a scroll of papyrus and a reed pen. Alongside him are two others, their faces so stern even the flies wouldn't dare come close. You know who they are. Ancient Egypt didn't have the concept of avoiding officials. This is the temple's tax collection crew, and they haven't come to ask how you're feeling. You stand upright, hands clutching your garment, eyes to the ground, as if not looking up might make them forget you're there. But no, the list never forgets, especially when that list is written in permanent ink. An official fact, in ancient Egypt, taxes weren't paid in coins, but in goods, labor, or time worked for the state and temples. Grain, onions, oil, even wool from the one sheep you still own. All of it could be converted into something called sacred duty. You force a smile, handing over a few bags of grain and a jar of beer fermented just enough not to cause blindness. The scribe dots the scroll, nods, and then looks further into your house. "Where's the cow?" one of them asks. You give a stiff smile. "She's sleeping," meaning she's been hidden behind the hill. Unfortunately, records don't sleep. A strange fact, the ancient Egyptians had a very detailed inventory system. At times, even each onion stalk you grew could be recorded, checked, and compared to the previous season. If something was missing, it might be called fraud. Even if the truth was simply, the rats were especially enthusiastic this year. Scholars still debate, was Egypt's tax system truly about maintaining order and fairness, or was it a way for the priesthood and officials to keep absolute control? Some say it was a unique economic ecosystem. Others say it was just ancient hardcore revenue extraction. You sigh. You know that from now until the end of the season, you'll have to work several extra weeks on levee construction, tomb cleaning, or hauling soil for a temple project. You won't be paid, but you will earn spiritual merit. That night, you sit alone, fingers brushing the worn linen cloth. Outside, the moon glows faintly. You hear the sound of water murmuring from the Nile, the chirping of crickets, and the collective sigh of the entire village. Still, you don't feel sad, because there's something about this recurring injustice that makes it familiar. Like the way the sun will shine, fish will smell, and Pharaoh will always live more lavishly than you, even if he only ever meets you through taxes. You're tilling the soil, shoulders strained, eyes squinting from the sun, when suddenly the distant sound of drums and cymbals reaches your ears. It's not a warning. It's an invitation. You know instantly, today is not an ordinary day. It's a festival. And not all festivals are somber or sacred. Some of them have beer. You drop your hoe, splash some water on your face, adjust your loincloth. You're still as dusty as a loaf dropped in the dirt, but at least now you have a reason not to dig anymore. Outside, people are gathering around the temple courtyard. Beer jars are being opened, bread laid out, lotus flowers tucked into hair, and the sistrum players begin their rhythmic sway, enough to make listeners either dream or lose their balance. Here's something few people realize. Ancient Egyptian beer wasn't clear and cold like you might imagine. It was cloudy, thick, and sort of like fermented porridge. But it did one thing well. It made you forget your aching back. You sit down, cradling a mug the size of a wash basin, drinking in gulps that taste of grain, and might just make you start a conversation with a statue of a god. The man next to you is laughing. An old woman sways to the rhythm, though it's unclear whether from joy or because the beer has begun its work. Sometimes you wonder, how could a society with such strict laws allow people to get drunk in a temple? But then you remember, the Egyptians believed that joy, too, could please the gods. Some festivals were even stranger. The festival of Hathor, goddess of love, music, and beer, was described as a time when villagers drank to remember the gods who saved the world through laughter. Sort of like a year-end party, but with stone statues and hip-shaking dances. Scholars still debate its meaning. Did Egyptians drink for pleasure or for spiritual connection? Some carvings show participants falling backwards from the blessings. Either way, you're careful. Passing out in front of the temple isn't a great way to start the next day. You look around. A child is molding bread into the shape of the river god. A tipsy uncle is dancing what looks like a flying whale dance, even though Egypt has no whales. The whole village is letting go. A single day with no burdens, no taxes, no bruised hands. You smile. The bread is a bit hard, but sweet. The beer is still murky like rice water running through fingers, but there's something warm about it, even under the 40-degree sun. And in that moment, when the drums rise and the singing swells, you feel lighter, like a soul after it has passed the feather's judgment. You're now curled up in a corner of your house, arms around your belly, sweating like the Nile in flood season. The pain isn't sharp, but it's persistent, nagging, and worst of all, it keeps you from getting up to bake breakfast bread. You groan softly. No one hears, or if they do, they don't know what to do. Except, call the healer. After a while, the healer arrives, looking like an uncle who avoids baths, but wears a seriously cool lapis lazuli amulet. He doesn't greet you, just places a hand on your forehead and nods mysteriously. Before you can ask, he's already mixing something: honey, mugwort, a bit of goat fat, and dried onion peels. It looks like salad gone wrong under the sun, but he calls it a sacred poultice. In fact, ancient Egypt had an incredibly advanced medical system. They knew how to stitch wounds, set bones, even drain abscesses with copper tubes. But just as important, they believed illnesses could come from angry gods, or melancholy spirits. The healer chants something, then starts smearing the salad onto your belly, muttering like he's texting the divine. You want to believe, but the onion stings your eyes like sand blown backwards in the wind. Here's a curious fact. Egyptians used moldy bread to treat infections. The molds housed bacteria that accidentally created natural antibiotics, meaning you could get scolded for forgetting your bread, then be saved by it. Scholars still argue, were Egyptian remedies truly effective or just sacred luck wrapped in ancient faith? Some texts are scientifically detailed, but others suggest curing coughs by whispering into a cup of water. You watch the healer pull out a small wooden amulet, carved with a curling snake and the sun. "Wear this to sleep in peace," he says. You don't ask questions. That night, your belly still rumbles like a rehearsal drumline. But maybe it's the medicine, maybe the amulet, or maybe just pure exhaustion. You fall asleep. And when you wake up, your stomach is quiet. A shaft of light cuts through the thatched roof. Outside, the village cat is guarding your doorway, eyes half shut, as if it knows everything, including the real power of honey onion medicine. You exhale. Maybe you're not completely healed, but you're alive, and your belly has calmed. And in ancient Egypt, that was already a daily miracle. You're standing before a stone gate so tall its shadow stretches into the afterlife. On the gate, intricate carvings shimmer in the sunlight. Ra sailing the solar boat, Horus with wings spread wide, and a man being struck with an oversized spoon. Apparently, even the gods take cooking seriously. You lift your head, squinting slightly from the light reflecting off the stone. You're standing before the Temple of Karnak, or at least a humbler village version of it. Every village has a temple, and a temple is not a place you want to casually visit if you're not properly dressed. You step inside. The air is thick with resin, incense, and cold stone. Light pierces through a small opening in the ceiling, spotlighting the god's statue. Yes, you feel like you're being examined, not just your heart, but also your half-formed plans to skip work. You wonder, how did the ancients build such massive places without cranes, without CAD software, and with workers paid in bread? Here's something few know. Great temples like Luxor or Karnak were built over centuries by generations of pharaohs, each trying to extend their legacy in stone. No one dared destroy the old, but everyone wanted their name added. You walk through a corridor where pillars tower 3 times your height, with stone blocks arranged so perfectly. You begin to suspect divine intervention from an engineering god. In the sanctuary, a priest is washing the statue with perfume and linen, because even statues must bathe daily. Scholars still debate, were temples truly sacred houses of worship or cleverly disguised government offices? After all, temples held archives, grain storage, tax records, ledgers, and even council chambers. In truth, the high priest was much like a finance minister, but wearing linen robes and a hat twice the weight of his head. You quietly stand in a corner, running your fingers along the hieroglyphs on the wall. An eye, a bird, a loaf of bread, a man walking. It might be a spell, or the god's breakfast menu. No one knows for sure. From the ceiling, a beam of light cuts through just as you sigh, and you realize here, every stone holds a prayer, a reverence, and a reminder that those who built this once dreamed of becoming immortal. You step out of the temple. The sun hits your face, as usual. But this time, it doesn't bother you, because inside, something feels still, deep, and ancient, like you've just walked through a story with no words, yet said so much. You're squatting beside a flat rock, twirling a sharpened reed in your fingers. In front of you is a small wooden board coated in white plaster, a temporary substitute for papyrus because you're still learning to write. And writing in ancient Egypt is not like jotting down a grocery list. You've just finished drawing an eye, elegant, nearly perfect, but then you sigh. You meant to write food, but it seems you've accidentally written the death that sees. Not easy, is it? The Egyptian writing system, hieroglyphs, are letters, symbols, and magic spells all at once. A bird could be a bird, a sound, or simply a decorative flourish, depending on its placement and the mood of the writer. You frown, trying to recall which shape means house, which one means heart, and which one warns, don't mess this up, or Seth might visit you in your dreams. One curious fact, hieroglyphs can be written left to right to left, or top to bottom. The only rule is, follow the direction the animals are facing. If the bird looks right, you read right. If it looks left, you guessed it. You glance up. In the corner sits a scribe, a professional writer. He's calm, in spotless white, not a grain of sand on him, his hand gliding across papyrus like he's signing divine insurance contracts. And in a way, he is. He's writing books for the dead. Scholars have debated for decades, were hieroglyphs truly a common language or reserved for elites and sacred rituals? Either way, it's the one thing that ensured your name would be remembered after you were gone. You return to your board, continuing your writing, more carefully now, every curve, every dot, because a misspelled name could mean a soul goes unrecognized in the afterlife. In Egyptian culture, being forgotten is worse than death. It's a form of erasing the soul. You shiver slightly. Writing in ancient Egypt was a noble profession. Those who could write were exempt from manual labor, respected like physicians or priests. A scribe could spend a lifetime writing others' names, and in doing so ensure his own name lived on in the final lines. You take a breath and rewrite the word for food. This time, the bird faces the right direction, and you smile. You're not a master yet, but you've come to understand this. Writing here isn't just for recording, it's for preserving names, memories, and souls. You've just completed a tidy line of text when a soft voice calls from outside. Not a messenger. Ancient Egypt didn't have a postal service. It's your mother, parting the curtain, nodding as if you've just graduated from a 3-year course in writing names correctly. Come out. Someone's here to propose. You freeze. Not because you're surprised, but because you know. Once you reach a certain age, marriage is inevitable. No Tinder. No getting to know each other better. Just a glance exchanged between two mothers and a nod that legally binds as firmly as well-baked beer bread. You sit still, palms sweating, though the weather is as usual, hot. In ancient Egyptian culture, marriage required no priest, no paperwork, and no golden rings. Just two people agreeing to live together, share property, and of course, share morning bread-making duties. In truth, love stories weren't always romantic like the Lotus Garden scenes painted on old walls. Many couples married out of practicality. Small villages, few people, those who could write were favored, and those who could raise cattle were even better. You, despite being literate, still need at least one sheep as a dowry. Here's something unexpected. Women in ancient Egypt had clear property rights. In the case of divorce, which did happen fairly often, they could keep their dowries, homes, and even sue their ex-husbands for unpaid bread debts. Scholars still debate. Was marriage more about love, duty, or a God-approved survival pact? Some texts show couples who loved each other a long time, but there are also court records over grievances like refusing to wake early to brew beer. You glance at the person beside you, the one who, by brief agreement, will now join you in breaking soil, swatting flies, and having children when the gods deem it fitting. You're not in love like a novel, but you know this is the person who will walk with you through flood seasons, tax seasons, and the occasional mysterious stomachache. Then time passes, and one morning, without warning, you hear the faintest cry from the corner of the house. A new life. Giving birth in ancient Egypt was a battle without swords. Only linen, prayers, and a lot of hope. No anesthesia, no obstetrician. Just a midwife. Usually someone who had birthed at least 5 children, and a wooden statue of Bez on the wall to scare off idle spirits. An odd tradition. Babies weren't named immediately. In some regions, families waited weeks. Due to the high infant mortality rate, people didn't want to give a name to a child who might not stay long. You look at your sleeping child, feet twitching gently as if dreaming of grain and milk. You think maybe they'll grow up to write or brew beer. Maybe they'll follow in your footsteps or be sent to the temple as a priest if they're smarter than their parents. Scholars still study whether Egyptians saw children as extensions of the soul or as long-term investments for old age security. Whatever the case, one thing is constant. Children were hope, and the kind of challenge that made your back hurt worse than hauling temple stones. You lay the child down on a straw mat, covering them with a thin linen cloth. A breeze from the Nile slips through the door, not enough to cool, but enough to make you believe things will be all right. You wake before the sun breaks through the thatched roof, but the first cry has already risen. Loud, sharp, as if your child just got poked in a dream by the god Ra himself. You sigh, pulling yourself off the straw mat. One arm cradles the baby, the other pushes the cat off the water jar. Welcome to your full-time job, raising a small life with your hands, your prayers, and the hope that the goddess Taweret is always on duty. No diapers, no cloth nappies, just reusable linen, if you're lucky, and a bit of beeswax. You're thankful for breezy days because the smell isn't nearly as pleasant as the murals suggest. Feeding? Of course. But you also know children were often breastfed until the age of 3, both for nutrition and as a biological insurance policy, because Nile water isn't something you want in baby formula. Here's a little-known fact. If wealthy enough, Egyptian women could hire a wet nurse. The best ones had their names carved on their employer's tomb. Not out of affection, but because a child who survived was sacred. You still remember yesterday morning, your baby smiled for the first time, maybe because you meowed like a cat, or maybe because the mosquitoes missed their forehead for once. But you saw the light in their eyes, and for that moment you forgot your sandals had fallen apart since last month. Children grow fast, and with them, worries change form. From will they sleep through the night to will they touch a scorpion, and eventually, will they learn to carve hieroglyphs or decide to become a hired boatman instead? Historians still debate. Was education in ancient Egypt truly widespread or only for wealthy boys? Some inscriptions suggest children studied at temple schools, but the punishments hurt for centuries. Records mention teachers who taught more with their hands than their words. But you don't think that far ahead. You just hope today your child won't wade into the river, won't eat dirt, and, if possible, won't pour porridge all over the cat. Cats in ancient Egypt were deeply revered, but also quite capable of divine tantrums. At night, as the crickets sing and the smell of insect-burning smoke lingers in the air, you cradle your child to sleep. No nightlight, just the moonlight slipping through the window slats and the gentle breath of a small soul growing day by day. You smile. You don't know what the future holds for them, but you know this. Raising a child in ancient Egypt isn't just survival, it's choosing to believe in every time they open their eyes. And tomorrow, when the sun rises again, you'll keep going, because you are a father, a mother, and a link in a chain that stretches through 1,000 years of sand and time. You're sitting under the eaves, back against a mud wall, breathing like the Nile breeze at dusk. Your molar has been aching for 3 days. Not just pain, it has its own heartbeat, and the daylight is starting to feel a bit too much. You think about seeing a healer, not a doctor, because the concept of doctor doesn't really exist yet. But in ancient Egypt, healers were real professionals with reputation, manuals, and sometimes the right to talk boldly with the gods. You step into his house and immediately catch the scent of honey, fish oil, and heat radiating from scrolls filled with symbols you wouldn't dare try to pronounce. He glances at you, nods lightly, like he's seen this kind of pain 100 times. He doesn't ask if you brushed your teeth. You don't have a toothbrush. He peers at your gums, then mixes a thick blend, powdered bark, crushed onion, honey, and a spell to banish invisible snakes from the gums. It's strange, but it works. The Egyptians knew how to use mold from bread as natural antibiotics. They knew how to stop bleeding, stitch with linen thread, and set bones, both with hands and with rituals. A lesser-known fact, healers often specialized. One treated only eyes, another only stomachs. There was even someone dedicated solely to the anus. Yes, really. Some texts say the most respected person in the village was the one who treated belly buttons. Historians still debate, were ancient cures medically sound or powered by belief and the blessings of nature? But one thing is certain, if you visited a healer and didn't get better, you still didn't complain. Because who knows, maybe the gods were listening. You feel better after a few days drinking onion leaf iced tea and getting rubbed with a bit of crocodile dung. Maybe it's magic, maybe coincidence. But you live. And in ancient Egypt, making it past age 30 was a miracle. Because, did you know? People back then didn't expect to live to 80. The average life expectancy hovered around 35 to 40. But that number is skewed. Many children didn't survive past age 5. If you made it through childhood, you might reach 50 or even 60 if you avoided crocodiles, scorpions, and spoiled food. There were no antibiotics, no sterile surgery. If you had a fever, you were steamed with oils and read poetry under your pillow. If you cut your hand, it was stitched with copper needles after being rinsed with beer. Yes, beer. And yet, Egyptians didn't fear death. They prepared for it like you'd prepare a vacation. Every jar, every cloth, every meal readied for the next life. Because to them, death was simply moving house. A new home, better with your own boat, fewer mosquitoes, and if rituals were done right, no toothaches. You sit under the eaves, the pain fading, a piece of bread, still a bit hard in your hand, watching your child play by the water. The sun is dusky red, the wind rustling your linen robe. You don't know how long you'll live, but you know this. Each day here, with sand, wind, cats, and ever-present gods, is a quiet triumph, and you are alive. in a way that's deeply ancient and fully present. You're squatting in the corner of the yard beside a small clay oven. In your hands is a lump of sticky dough, clinging to every finger as if it doesn't want to let go. Today is your turn to bake bread, and it's not exactly a pleasant experience. The dough is mixed by hand, no gloves, no mixer, just the faith that this lump will rise, bake, and not turn out so hard that it breaks another tooth. What you're making is emmer bread, the most basic food, so essential it serves as wages, dowry, and even a unit of social value. Surely, you've heard people praise Egypt as the granary of the ancient world. That's true, but the grain here is ancient wheat. Coarse, full of tough husks, and when ground, it's still gritty, like someone deliberately mixed in sand to test the strength of human teeth. After bread, you move on to the drink, beer. But don't picture a chilled pint with golden foam. No, ancient Egyptian beer was more like a fermented grain soup, thick, cloudy, pungent, and usually drunk through a straw to avoid swallowing sediment. Doesn't sound appetizing? Maybe, but you need it. It's safer than Nile water, full of calories, and most importantly, even children drank it. Not to be cool, but simply to survive. A lesser-known fact, the Egyptians had over 15 different words for types of bread and beer, from soft, chewy, and crispy to those used for offerings to the gods, because even deities needed their carbs. Perhaps that's why they were constantly gifted loaves, though they never ate them. A typical meal for you, assuming you're not royalty, usually includes bread, always present, always hard, beer, always murky, always essential, onions, garlic, coriander, both food and medicine, lentils, green beans, protein for the working class, dried dates, grapes, nature's dessert, grilled river fish, if you're lucky, or the child of a skilled fisherman. There's no meat every day. Meat is a luxury, mostly reserved for festivals or rituals, and cattle? Don't dream of it. Cows are sacred, usually for ceremonies, not roasting. Some scholars believe that despite the simplicity of the food, Egyptians were remarkably inventive. They used yeast, salt, and herbs to add depth of flavor. Some ancient recipes have even been found carved into stone, definitely not for sharing on Pinterest. You carry a plate of bread, hot, dry, slightly charred at the edges, and sit by the doorway to eat. No chopsticks, no napkins, just hands, mouth, and the skill to avoid cutting your gums. You recall what your mother once said when you winced. Bite it, child. It's better than air and has less sand than last week. You've barely finished swallowing a chunk of bread hard as fired clay, still brushing sand from your teeth, when word comes, your neighbor has died. Not an unexpected sorrow, he was nearly 40, which means old enough that Anubis may have already written his name down. And so the whole village prepares, not to weep, but to organize a multi-day event full of rituals and with more ceremony than a royal wedding. In ancient Egypt, the dead don't leave. They are led to the eternal place. And for such a journey, you need luggage. You look around. Linen weavers are sewing cloth. Men carry jars of scented oils. Children are tasked with gathering shabti figurines, those miniature servants who will farm for you in the afterlife. One strange detail most people miss. Some mummies were found stuffed with dried grass and fragrant herbs before embalming. Some scholars say it was for odor control. Others believe it was to keep the soul from getting lost in the scent of the living. You see the priests beginning the rites. The air is thick with incense and resin. The body will be embalmed over 70 days using natron salt, linen, and dozens of spells to ward off hungry spirits. Historians still debate, were these procedures purely sacred or also driven by the economic interests of the priesthood? But everyone agrees on one point. Ancient Egyptians spent heavily on death. Why? Because they believed death was a journey. Your heart would be weighed against a feather. If it was too heavy with sin, you would be devoured by Ammit, a beast with a crocodile's head, lion's body, and hippopotamus rear. There were no second chances, only eternal disappearance. You're sitting on the rooftop watching a group of people prepare a burial site. In your hand is a small piece of bread, this one made special, without sand, meant to be placed in the tomb of the departed. You're not afraid of death. Here, death is just the next step, if you've lived decently, worked hard, and haven't offended any important gods. Especially not by accidentally uprooting a sacred plant in Thoth's temple. It's an old story, but people still whisper about it. You know that one day you too will prepare a modest tomb, a few jars of beer, a cat statue, and a pocket-sized guide to the underworld. And you hope, if not personally greeted by Ra, at least to have a nice view of the Nile in the next life. You're standing at the edge of a field, the Nile breeze moving through your thin linen robe, raising goosebumps like the god Sobek just whispered behind your back. This is ancient Egypt. No snow, no falling leaves, but plenty of mud. The air is cooler, yes. Easier to breathe, perhaps. But as cozy as the images you've seen in travel brochures? Not quite. Winter in ancient Egypt wasn't Europe cold, but also not warm year-round like the songs suggest. Temperatures could drop below 10 degrees Celsius at night, especially near the desert. And you, with your single linen tunic, are shivering in a corner of your mud and straw house. The roof is leaking from last night's dew. Even your cat, the sacred creature of Bastet, has left in search of somewhere warmer, leaving you with a hole-ridden blanket and an oil lamp that ran out during the last flood season. A curious fact, ancient Egyptians didn't have a specific word for winter. As we know it, they divided the year into 3 main seasons: Akhet, the flood season; Peret, the planting season; Shemu, the harvest season. The cold you're feeling now falls in the middle of Peret, when the waters recede, mud reaches your ankles, and everyone is busy with farm tools and early season coughs. Historians still debate, did Egyptians make thicker clothes for colder months, or did they just endure it? Some murals show long cloaks, but it's unclear whether they were for warmth or just ceremonial flair. You sit beside the clay stove, holding a bowl of thin lentil porridge. The steam stings your eyes, but it also warms your hands. No fireplace, no charcoal bricks, just blackened wood embers and a hint of castor oil burning for fragrance. The whole family huddles around the fire. No one says much. Winter slows the work, but increases the sickness, from colds and coughs to chills sent by Seth. You sneeze. Grandma looks at you, blows on a bean, and mumbles something in ancient dialect. Might be a charm, might just be a soft scolding. Despite the harshness, winter here has a strange gift. It brings Egyptians closer together. You see children gather around their mother, listening to tales of Osiris and the cold moon. You see elders pulling out their wooden dentures to polish them, for prayer. You exhale, watching your breath curl like temple incense. Winter here isn't white and snowy, but it still makes you think more deeply about life and how fragile it truly is. You're trudging along the water's edge, the mud as soft as foot cream, your little toe nearly bitten by a curious fish or a mischievous water bug. The river before you is wide, deep, and seems to breathe. In ancient Egypt, you didn't just live by the Nile, you lived because of it. Every drop of water was a god's decision, and each year when the floods came, the Nile didn't ask permission. It entered your fields, your yard, your home, like relatives showing up unannounced. A historical record from the New Kingdom, Stoff 1500 BCE, describes lavish ceremonies meant to ask the Nile not to get too emotional. Rightly so. Too little flood meant famine, too much meant destroyed homes. Just enough and you had what people called a gift from the god Happy. You once thought about moving to higher ground, but then remembered no fish on the hilltops. More importantly, fertile soil only comes from the Nile's generous deposits of silt. Here's something not widely known. The Nile flows from south to north, opposite most major rivers. That's why ancient Egyptian maps are upside down by modern standards. Upper Egypt is in the south and Lower Egypt is in the north. Not a printing error, just a worldview that begins where the water is born, not where it ends. You bend down and wash your face. The water is cool, with a smell of algae and a slight tang of anxiety. You remember, last month, a distant cousin drank from the wrong spot, just after someone did laundry upstream. The whole village got a day off. Historians still debate, did the ancient Egyptians fully grasp water pollution? Some evidence shows they had rules against dumping waste near the river, but religious rituals often involved very organic activities. For example, offering live animals to the river gods and hoping no one was doing their laundry nearby. You hear oars slapping the water, a wooden boat slides past carrying vegetables, jars of beer, and 3 people singing a hymn to Sobek in a tone that sounds like a cat scratching stone. You smile softly. Without the Nile, there is no Egypt, no fields, no festivals, no sunbathing fat cats. The river is the heartbeat, the highway, the natural fridge, the bathhouse, the laundry, and the place to whisper prayers when no one else listens. You look down at the water. It flows quietly but never stops. Like life here, simple, repetitive, yet strangely full of stories. You lean back against a sun-baked mud wall, evening wind rustling the reeds with a sound like your mother gently scolding, "Didn't finish weeding again today?" And you look out at a small riverside village where flat rooftops sit shoulder to shoulder like sun-scorched clay Lego pieces arranged across the land. In ancient Egypt, you didn't just live in a village. You were part of the village, in every literal and sacred sense. Egyptian farming villages had no fences, no welcome to our cultural hamlet gates. But they had order, and that order stuck to you tighter than flies to a pot of salted fish. Here's something not widely known. Village names were often tied to a god or a sacred geographic feature. For example, Per-Bastet, House of the Cat Goddess, or Iunu, which later became Heliopolis. You and your neighbors all farm, but the land isn't yours. Most farmland belonged to temples, nobles, or the state. You were only assigned a plot. Each season, a local official, usually the one with a wooden tablet and eyes that seemed to know all your secrets, would point and declare, "This house, that field, that house, the riverside plot." You sigh, remembering the annual land surveying ritual when the whole village stood in line, waiting for the inspector to measure each square meter with a rope pulled from his belt. Precise? Probably not. But arguing wasn't exactly wise. A real historical detail. Ancient inscriptions record land disputes between villagers and temple officials, some dragging on for 3 generations. Historians still debate. Were farmers relentlessly exploited, or did they have small freedoms to grow extra crops, which could be traded for beer and purple onions on festival days? Archaeological evidence is as vague as sunset behind a straw curtain. What about social structure? You'd be surprised. Even poor villages had leadership. A village elder, a scribe, someone to track harvests, someone to inspect yields, and someone officially responsible for catching onion thieves. Everything was recorded on wooden tablets in black ink, often in handwriting so bad even Thoth would frown. You didn't live alone. You relied on community. One person harvested, one built levees, one carried water, and one passed bread to the neighbor in exchange for stories. And when harvest came, the entire village contributed a portion to the temple or the state granary, a kind of agricultural tax. If someone didn't give enough, they might be invited for tea with the inventory officials, and a few very personal questions. The sun is setting, the village hums with children's laughter, grain being pounded, and a soft lullaby rising from someone's kitchen. You tell yourself, tomorrow I'll sow, I'll reap, and once again be gossiped about by the neighbor for not lending her the pot. But you're not sad, because this is your village, and here, though poor, you are never alone. Then one day, as you're hunched over gathering cow dung in the backyard, convincing yourself this is an honorable task for preserving the agricultural cycle, something strange happens. Not a sign from the gods, but a glance from a royal entourage passing by on chariots. You happen to look up just as the evening sun strikes your mud-streaked, sunburned back and your shovel toss lands with oddly dramatic flair. Only a few seconds. But enough for one of Pharaoh's overseers, tasked with identifying potential talents among the commoners, to scribble something on his wooden tablet. That night, just as you're about to bite into your dry bread with pickled radish, a royal soldier knocks on your door. You've been summoned to the capital to serve in the campaign for territorial expansion. Before you can say, "Wait, what?" you're handed new leather sandals, a belt with a hook for weapons, and a faint smirk from the village elder. "We're proud. Try not to die." You're now standing in a vast sea of sand, the wind slapping your face like a salted fish, and the sun baking the back of your neck like a living brick kiln. Beside you, other warriors oil their khopesh, the signature sickle sword of Egypt, shaped like something Seth himself might have designed just to stir chaos. You've never killed anyone, unless you count the frog in the water jar last week. Little known fact, ancient Egyptian armies often organized soldiers into units of 10, called a decade, a kind of proto-squad. You trained together, ate together, and got scolded together. You're the newest recruit in a unit called the Divine Dust, alongside a guy who only seems to know 2 words, stab fast. Historians still argue, did commoner soldiers like you receive proper training, or were they just tossed onto the battlefield with the advice, follow the guy ahead, unless he's dying? No clear answer yet, but judging by how your teammate twirls his sword like he's stirring porridge, it's a bit worrying. The military camp lies near an oasis, rows of canvas tents stretching into the dark, oil lamps flickering like the anxious eyes of soldiers who've never been far from home. You eat dinner. Thick barley stew, bread, and a bowl of water with something sluggish floating in it. You're not sure if it's a frog or a hallucination. After the meal come the entertainment. An old soldier telling stories, always beginning with, "Back when I was younger than you," and ending with, "And that's why I only have one ear." You don't dare ask for details. Marching day. You strap on your leather shield, sling your khopesh over your back, and step in line to the cadence of shouted commands. Wind slips through the gaps in your tunic, and sand works its way into every toe, every fold, every armpit, a full-body massage of the least relaxing kind. In the distance lies enemy land, home of the sea peoples, warriors from far-off coasts who speak an unknown tongue and wear helmets that look suspiciously like upside-down fruit baskets. You take a breath. Then the war horn sounds. You freeze in the desert as the horn blasts again, long echoing like a god just woke up in the wrong century. The Egyptian line begins to move. Not rushed, but deliberate. You feel the war drums syncing with your heartbeat, or maybe your heart's just out of rhythm. Dust clouds the horizon. Metal clashes ring from the front. Soldiers lean forward. Before you can ask, "Do I really need to run into this?" someone behind you gives you a firm push, as if to say, "What are you waiting for? Horus doesn't accept late recruits." A detail most overlook, the iconic khopesh, curved like a crescent moon, wasn't made for stabbing. It was for hooking and slashing. Practical, terrifying, and slightly tricky to wield, especially if you're more used to swinging a hoe than a weapon. You grip it tighter, palms sweating, wind whistles through leather shields, sweeping away the sand and your dignity. Then you see them, sea peoples. Bronze helmets, strange weapons, and very unfriendly eyes. They shout something, perhaps a war cry, or perhaps just onions half price today. You don't wait to find out. You charge forward with your unit. And then, for no good reason, your foot catches on what might have been a sacred rock, and you fall face first right as an enemy blade whizzes overhead. That stumble saves your life. The soldier behind you yells, assuming you've boldly launched the first attack. The whole squad surges forward. The enemy falters for a second. You're pinned under 3 men, part of a shield and at least 1 rogue staff. But you survive. After the battle, you're sprawled outside your tent, head pounding like a rock concert performed by actual rocks. A passing officer pauses. "Humph, you were the first to fall, weren't you?" You nod. Good. Bold. Brave. You don't correct him. Historians still debate. Did Egyptian soldiers truly march in disciplined formations like temple reliefs suggest, or was it just artistic enhancement of chaos? Either way, you who fell in the right place at the right time have now been labeled a vanguard warrior. Unfair to those who actually landed a blow? Maybe, but you lived. That night, the camp holds a small celebration. Special bread, a few sprigs of green onion, a luxury, and wine diluted with river water, filtered through an old cloth. You sit, now a living legend, the one who opened the charge. Cups clink. Backs are patted. And suddenly, you feel proud. You, a riverbank farmer, have become the living symbol of your unit. You still don't know if you'll make it to the next battle. But tonight, under the stars at the front line, with the smell of roasted meat in the air, offbeat lute music, and toasts from comrades, you know you're living a different life now, one that doesn't smell of farmland. Now you're sitting under the shade of a palm in the temple courtyard, sweat still clinging to you from morning drills when the festival drums sound. The captain, the same one who yelled at you yesterday for spilling stew on his sandals, suddenly softens. Dress for ceremony. Pharaoh is coming. Dress means a clean loincloth, sandals with unbroken straps, and a necklace strung from seashells and chipped stones that might be semi-precious or just shiny. You're lined up among the other soldiers, all trying to look dignified, though everyone's stomach is rumbling from skipping lunch to await the royal arrival. Pharaoh appears, riding a chariot, wearing a towering crown that gleams under the sun, like a god stepped out of a temple wall painting. The crowd falls to their knees. You kneel too, a bit slower because your leg still aches from that now legendary fall. Music fills the air, drums, reed flutes, and something that sounds suspiciously like a clay jar being tapped with a bronze spoon. Dancers swirl around the temple, their sheer veils fluttering like waves on the Nile. Fermented wine is poured freely. The scent of baked bread drifts in the air, mixing with sweet incense, smelling exactly like those hunger-induced dreams you've had. A strange detail few know, ancient Egyptian victory festivals often lasted for days, involving priests, musicians, dancers, and even impersonators of gods. Yes, people were chosen to dress as deities and walk among the crowd, bestowing blessings, sometimes a tap on the shoulder, sometimes a date fruit flung at your forehead. And then, as you're halfway through a bite of roasted onion, a girl approaches. She's wearing a hand-embroidered white dress, rare. Silver bangles, rarer still. And that smile seems aimed at no one else but you. "You're the one who charged first into battle, aren't you?" she asks. You quickly swallow your onion. More like, tripped forward, but yeah, close enough. She laughs, and now you're worried. That laugh is too nice. Suspicious. "My father admires brave men," she says, "also those with a full set of teeth." You blink. Before you can respond, she slips a small papyrus scroll into your hand, essentially a reverse resume. It reads, "Name, Nebit dowry, 3 goats, 2 jars of grape honey, and partial rights to a grain storage vault." Historians still debate whether post-battle marriages were common or simply exaggerated in royal records. But you, the almost groomed war hero, are living proof that maybe they were. You politely decline. Or rather, you nod awkwardly while slowly backing behind a palm tree, pretending someone is calling you from the distance. Night falls. Moonlight floods the temple courtyard, oil lamps flickering like ancestral spirits who've stopped by just to watch the fun for a bit. You lie on your back, gazing at the stars, a soft flute melody drifting from afar, and you wonder, what kind of age am I living in anyway? But you don't feel uneasy. Not anymore. Because in this land of sand, gods, and sand-coated bread, you've started to feel like you belong. You're standing at the village gate. The Nile breeze brushes your skin, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass, post-flood mud, and the distinct smell of something burning from someone's house. Probably another attempt at a sacred family bread recipe, revealed to grandma in a dream. The village is the same. Cracked mud walls, sun-scorched beyond repair, silent palm trees standing guard, and children screaming like Anubis himself is playing hide-and-seek. But one thing is different. You. You, who once hauled cow dung, swatted rats, and bathed in secret under moonlight, are returning in a soldier's loincloth, with a battle-worn shield, and a gaze just a little too confident. The villagers gather. People crowd around. Someone asks bluntly, "We heard you took an arrow for Pharaoh. Is it true?" You smile, neither confirming nor denying. An old woman nods knowingly. "I told you this one was never meant to die." Children run after you, shouting, "Hero, tell us how you chopped off the enemy's head." You pause. You've never chopped anything, except maybe that one tough green onion at the celebration feast. But you understand, to them, you're someone who returned from battle. And that alone lets their imagination fill in the rest. A little-known fact, soldiers returning from victory in ancient Egypt were sometimes granted a small riverside plot of land, along with an exemption from the first season's taxes. This made them both admired and quietly envied, especially in small villages like yours. You're invited to sit with the village council. They serve you fresh bread, juice mixed with honey, the kind you were only allowed a sip of in the army because, quote, getting tipsy might lead to grabbing the wrong shield. Historians still debate whether common soldiers were truly honored upon returning or just sent home to keep farming. Either way, you're sitting on a woven mat in the town square while your neighbor still has to collect goat droppings. You begin to slip back into village life. Morning. You walk the fields, though no one lets you carry a hoe anymore. Those hands are warriors' hands, they say, shouldn't be calloused. Afternoon. You lie on the roof, listening to the wind and thinking about that first water fluke worm you saw last year. Evening. You stroll the village, and once in a while someone greets you with, "Sir, sir." Small village, slow life. And though you sometimes miss the sound of war horns and the silver glint of armor and moonlight, the feeling of a roof at your back is something no battlefield can replace. Early morning. The sun has just peeked over the riverbank when a stranger arrives. He wears a white robe and carries a stone tablet engraved with the image of Thoth, god of knowledge, writing, and those frowns no one dares interpret. He's looking for you. Rumors spread faster than flood season mosquitoes. They say the great temple needs someone who can what? Record the sacred chants? Chants? You mean write? Yes, sitting down, holding a pen, not a shield. You nod. Writing? You can try. Little known fact, ancient Egyptian ink was made from soot, mixed with water and gum arabic, and written with sharpened reed pens on papyrus. It took you 3 days to learn not to snap the pen, and 7 more to stop accidentally drawing smiley faces into sacrificial records. You're sent to a scribe training room, a quiet chamber lined with symbols and stone tablets thick as both your calves combined. Each morning, you dip ink and practice writing the names of Ra, Osiris, and others, perfectly. Because writing a god's name incorrectly is considered blasphemy, and it might earn you a whipping with a palm branch. You persist, copying, mixing ink, swapping water. You begin to read rows of words with no vowels and distinguish 13 different types of standing birds based solely on the tilt of their necks. You begin to understand hieroglyphs aren't for the impatient. Historians still debate whether becoming a scribe was open to commoners or reserved for the elite. Some records show lower-class youth chosen for their memory, neat handwriting, and ability to sit still without dozing off. Luckily, you have all 3. One day, your teacher approaches. Tomorrow, you'll record the Moon Festival chant. If you write it wrong, we recite it wrong. And if we recite it wrong, well, you know what happens. You swallow hard. Yes, sir, he smiles. Good, bring a cloth. This new ink smears easily. That night, you don't sleep. You think about your days chasing rats, about the battlefield, about feasts with wine. Now about a sacred chant offered to the gods in a ceremony that could influence the coming flood season. No pressure, really. Just that everyone will probably blame you if the Nile doesn't rise this year. You smile softly, eyes half closed. Amid the gentle chorus of insects outside, you whisper, "Once, I just wrote my name on walls. Now I write for the gods." It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? You're sitting inside the temple's inner sanctuary. The air is hazy with incense swirling from a golden censer. Carved into the stone walls around you is the image of the god Ra, falcon-headed, crowned with the solar disk, watching you as if he knows you spilled ink this morning. In front of you lies a fresh papyrus scroll, ink newly ground, reed pen resting solemnly in your hand. The high priest stands nearby, the same one who frowned when your hieroglyph for moon curved a little too much and looked like fish. He hands you the original copy of the chant. Not long, just around 80 lines. But in that world, a single mistake could throw the earth off its axis, or so the people believed. You take a deep breath and begin the first line. The ink flows smoothly. Your eyes follow each hieroglyph. Part of you wonders, does Ra really read what I write? Then you remind yourself, of course he does. He's a god. A strange and sacred truth. Hieroglyphs weren't just writing. They were magic. If your name was carved into temple walls, it would live forever. But if it were erased, your soul would vanish from time itself. So you write carefully, deliberately, as though etching into eternity. The ceremony begins. Drums beat with a rhythm deep as the heartbeat of the earth. The priests dressed in white and barefoot murmur ancient prayers. One lights candles with perfumed oil. Another lifts a small statue and circles the altar, chanting. You sit behind a curtain transcribing each moment of the rite. An apprentice next to you hands over another scroll. He whispers, "Your hand's shaking." You glance over and reply, "Whose hand doesn't shake when writing for the gods?" When the ritual ends, the priest approaches your table. He silently reads the scroll. After a long pause, he nods, just slightly. Not a single line wrong. You exhale like someone who's just dodged a dozen arrows with one correctly drawn symbol.